I'm very pleased to be able to speak today with Dr. Michael Zerbs, one of the founding members or the founding directors of Algorithmics, a $150 million company with 450 clients, 90% of whom are financial institutions, helping them to understand data and analytics, very closely linked to the development of risk infrastructure, both within the organization as well as in the markets in which they operate. I want to be able to speak to you today on how you see risk or the management of risk, both at the market level and as well as the enterprise level, evolving as a result of the current economic crisis. Give us a sense of what you saw or what you thought you saw happening as the Lehman collapse was evolving on the counterparty risk front.
Well, first, thank you for the kind introduction and responding to your question. I think what the events in 2008 and 2009 showed is the importance of having a very holistic or integrated perspective of risk. So, for example, when Lehman went bankrupt, when other related firms got into trouble, a clear understanding of how counterparty risk, market risk, liquidity risk, of how it all interacted, of how a default with one institution could potentially lead to cascading defaults with other institutions, that was the information that if it had been available, it would have been really helpful. The problem was that not many institutions were able to have access to that information on a timely basis. It took days or weeks to get accurate information. Valuations became very uncertain because benchmarks that everybody relied on all of a sudden suffered from serious liquidity squeezes.
Were there benchmarks in the first place? Because so much of the trades were taking place off the counter, basically. So there was a scramble to look for benchmark information that didn't exist. In such a situation, how would an organization like yours have helped a financial institution understand its counterparty risk?
So I think when we look at benchmarks, it's probably useful to distinguish between fairly standardized products like an interest rate swap and much more complex products like CDOs or CDO squared or other related products. So for the first category, in normal market conditions, it's of course very straightforward to price a swap. Well-established LIBOR-type benchmarks were available, yet during the crisis, even those data points became unavailable. There were liquidity concerns and sudden spikes in interest rates and overnight rates. For less liquid products, the problem was much more severe because markets essentially ceased and products that would have been traded before became completely untradeable and couldn't be valued. Now, what could we have done? We at Algorithmics, our basic philosophy is that scenarios are the language of risk. If you want to understand the risk of a financial product or of a portfolio, look at a range of scenarios and see how the product would behave over those scenarios. So those institutions that faced difficulties in assessing the risk of products during the crisis, that scenario analysis would have helped. It would have given a broader range of possible outcomes, and it would have helped institutions to determine the worst case.
What is it about your tools that helps clients, or which you think comes very close to help them develop the scenarios that prepares them for a crisis like the Lehman's collapse?
I think the key feature, one of the key features, is that risk cannot be condensed to a single number. To really understand the risk of portfolios, you really have to get a sense of how risk behaves across a range of scenarios. You have to quickly, interactively redefine scenarios, drill down into different aspects of the portfolio. So it's that degree of interactivity that allows you to explore, that allows you to imagine, that allows you to go down different paths in better understanding a particular portfolio. That's what really helps in that context.
And the way in which you deal with your clients and in your relationship with clients, how much of that capability do you help them build as a result, over and above the tool sets that you sell them?
I think the key point is that we help clients to focus on the value-added risk analysis we take them away from worrying about the underlying infrastructure. We have consultants in some areas of our business that work with clients on occasion, but predominantly it is the clients that...
Do you take your own views on the scenarios yourself?
No, we don't. No.
Assuming both government or regulators and the financial institutions had all the data that they needed, they were using the right tool sets, they had the data, they had scenarios that showed them that this was possible. What then would have made it possible for them to come to the right conclusions in order to enable the markets to continue being efficient without making false assumptions in terms of what they needed to do as a result?
I think two things would have happened. First of all, the market as a whole and participants in the market would have understood earlier that risks were building up, that risks were reinforcing each other, that diversification that was assumed to take place actually didn't take place. The second point is, in an actual crisis situation, understanding exactly how counterparties relate to each other, how exposures relate to each other would have been very helpful. So let me give you one example. When Lehman went bankrupt, if on that particular weekend the US Treasury had fully understood what the cascading effects are of the Lehman bankruptcy, how it ties into exposures of other financial institutions, maybe the outcome would have been different. Maybe another effort would have been made to save Lehman. Maybe the industry would have worked harder to bail Lehman out over the weekend.
In your view, were the assumptions that they finally made, were they correct? Were they in the right direction?
I think that, I don't know is the short answer. I wasn't there. However, taking a step back and looking at the decisions that were made, it's pretty clear that decisions were made on insufficient information, and that a lot of decisions had to be taken very quickly with very basic information because there was no time to go back and gather more information. So in that sense, for sure, I don't think it's a black and white answer of the right or the wrong decision. Could the decision have been improved? Could the process of resolution have been improved had more information been available? Probably yes.
The problem with more information is there's such a thing as too much information, causes paralysis, especially when you have different stakeholders involved in that process. What have you seen taking place which can be described as best practice in terms of how much information is needed, the data model sets that are created and tested, and then which you have seen applied in situations where they've made a big difference as a result?
I think that's actually a really good point. I think quite often one of the recommendations that's being made now is to provide more information, to provide more transparency. But I think we as human beings actually at the end of the day have a very limited capacity to understand a large set of numbers that's being provided. So when I see risk reports that are, if you print them out, hundreds of pages long, and they're sent to senior executives, I wonder how much information they actually convey. They convey data, but they do not convey information. So that's why I think it's a very appropriate question. So what I think is best practice, and what I have seen is as Keynes once said, it's better to be roughly right than precisely wrong. In other words, when I communicate information as a risk modeler to the board or to senior management, I should really try to focus on the essence of what it is. I shouldn't try to communicate every single risk sensitivity in every single dimension. I should really focus on a few extreme stress scenarios. I should focus on the largest counterparties. I should focus on the 2 or 3 scenarios that really worry me. And condensing that information is a tough process. It requires judgment. It requires a decision what is important and what is not important. And it requires some risk taking because once in a while, as we prepare that information, we might be wrong. But nevertheless, again, it's better to be roughly right than precisely wrong. So in that context, bringing all the information together on 1 or 2 pages that are actually meaningful in a board discussion, I think is absolutely critical.